This is Closereads,
a philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. Moving fast and loose, we are going on to another new topic, and this one is in support of our current partially examined life run. We've been reading some Thomas Aquinas. At the time that we release this, folks will only have seen the existence of God stuff, but the part 3 of that discussion is going to be about the mind. And one of the sections right after the part that we read was on soul in human beings. So passage 18 in this Aquinas selected philosophical writings that we will link to. So it's page 184 or PDF page 220. I'd skimmed at least over this stuff, sort of the intervening parts between the parts that we were assigned ourselves. Had you looked at this section before?
No, I haven't looked at this one.
Okay. I thought maybe you had. I know that when this actually came up in our discussion, I wasn't really sure. Obviously, Aquinas as a Christian is going to be committed to the soul being eternal, but he also wants to follow more or less in Aristotle's footsteps. And I couldn't remember quite what we said about that. I had actually listened to our De Anima episode, but so the place in De Anima, on the soul is book 3, chapter 5. So Google is telling me, and so I have that open here. We'll pull that out when it seems relevant when Aquinas refers to it. But apparently, there's a lot of scholarly dispute. Like, given Aristotle's actual view of the soul, well, it's the form of the body. Right? The body is the matter, and then what organizes it, what makes it, and he doesn't have a Platonic idea of form. So it seems like the form should not be able to exist apart from particular bodies. Like, obviously there's a generic blueprint of humanity that is somehow stamped on each one of us, but the actual token of that form is in the individual human body. So when the individual human body dies, well, then there's no thing to be organized. So you don't say that the form of something, in our sort of our everyday, if you want to say there's a parallel arrangement of pencils that I put on the table. Well, now I smash the pencils around. I break the pencils. I throw them on the ground. Clearly that form is not there anymore. It does not continue to exist. So it seems like Aristotle's conception of the soul is not compatible with the Christian idea of a soul as the thing that is the ghost in the machine that is entering the body, and then the body dies and the soul goes on and is able to have an afterlife or whatever. Any other preliminary thoughts?
Nope.
All right, get us going. Page 184 here. Soul in human beings. This is from this is not from Summa Theologica. This is from Disputed Questions in De Anima, I think is the translation, from 1269. All right.
Okay. The subject for debate is soul. And then he's going to give us, And in the first place we asked, can the human soul be both a form and itself a thing?
So if it's not a thing, then how could it be a thing that continues to last beyond death, whatnot? Yeah.
Yeah. And now he's going to give us the points against his interlocutor that he will rebut later on. So here are the arguments against the soul being both a form and a thing. It seems not. For if a human soul is itself a thing, then it subsists and has complete existence in its own right. Now, anything attached to something after it has a complete existence is attached incidentally, as whiteness or clothing is attached to human beings. So body joined to soul will be joined to it incidentally. If then soul is itself a thing, it is in a substantial form of the body. All right, so the argument here is that if the soul is a thing, it could not be an essence, essentially. It could only be incidentally attached to the body.
Right. For the reasons that I just said that the essence. Well, we didn't really. I was giving the form in terms of like an arrangement of pencils or something, but the form, the essence of humanity. I mean, it is supposed to be more than just the arrangement of a living body in that the organs are all working together. I know that it has, if you're going to give a full description of it, you'd want to talk about its telos, right? It's trying to survive. It's trying to be rational. It's trying to grow, etc. Is there anything else that goes into essence there?
I mean, the essence is the form for Aristotle.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's, yeah, he's getting right to the problem, right? If it's also a thing, it just seems like it's patched on. And if it's patched on, it can't be the essence of the thing. How is it going to be the essence and another thing? I think Aristotle might even address this question. Come to think of it in the metaphysics, but I can't remember.
So should we read these in order, or should we jump to the replies?
Yeah, we can jump to the reply. I mean, that's what I did when I took notes. I didn't, because it's just too confusing.
Yeah, we're not going to remember this. It's several pages later. So jumping down to page 190, hence, so he's this is going to be his ultimate response to it. And there's some intervening reasoning that we'll get to, but even if a soul has a complete existence, it doesn't follow that body is joined to it incidentally. For one reason, soul shares that very same existence with body, so that there is one existence of the whole composite. And for another, even though soul can subsist of itself, it doesn't have a complete specific nature, but body is joined to it is joined to it to complete its nature. That's difficult.
Yeah. So what I suggest, and this is what the guy who wrote the introduction suggests, is that we read the middle part first,
Okay.
and then come back to the objections and then his responses. Because yeah, some of these sometimes they're understandable in their own right, but in this case, I think we need the intervening reasoning to understand his rebuttal here.
So the in reply section 187, is that what you're saying?
Let's let's do the in reply section first and see how that goes, and then come back up.
Okay. So the sort of global. Well, so he's putting forward these objections that to the thing that he's going to ultimately argue, and I see our editor even skips some, and then against that, so he puts two things that are actually going to say be an authority he is citing, or at least a position that he's citing. Yeah, I see the first against that actually is relevant to Aristotle, so maybe we should read that. This is just two paragraphs here.
Okay.
All right. So,
but against that,
yeah.
one, what decides a thing's species is the form characteristic of it. But what makes human beings human is reason. So their characteristic form has a soul that reasons.
Is a soul.
Yep, is a soul. But since, as Aristotle says, understanding needs no bodily organ, the human soul can act in its own right, and so must be able to subsist in its own right as itself a thing. So the human soul is itself both a form and a thing. Okay.
So maybe we should just jump to the read the little bit of Aristotle that is relevant right here, since we're hitting it.
Okay.
Yeah. So this whole book 3, chapter 5, this is what Google was pointing me at, and it's only four pretty short paragraphs, and he only mentions immortality at the end. But let's just read the whole thing here. Since in every class of things, as in nature as a whole, we find two factors involved: a matter, which is potentially all the particulars included in the class; a cause, which is productive in the sense that it makes them all, the latter standing to the former, as, for example, an art to its material. These distinct elements must likewise be found within a soul. So there's a matter and a form. The form is the cause that is productive, like an art to its material. Yeah. So the soul makes the body into a living being. It would just be a bunch of matter lying on the ground. And in fact, mind, as we have described it, is what it is by the virtue of becoming all things. While there is another, which is what it is by virtue of making all things. This is a sort of positive state like light, for in a sense, light makes potential colors into actual colors. This is more difficult. Do you want to weigh in on this here.
Mind, as we have described it, is what
Is what
it is. Sorry. Is what it is. Is that what it is? Just repeated accidentally?
No, it is what it is. Oh, it is what it is. What it is. Yes, there is a typo there. That's
It
we're
is what
not.
it is. It is what it is. What it is. Okay. By virtue of becoming all things. What the hell
So
does that mean?
So I think this was
becoming
that
all things.
the sense organ, in a sense, becomes it has the potentiality to be actualized to
Oh, yeah.
match its appropriate type of input. So the eye can literally turn red when it sees a red object. It can literally, you just think about an image on the fovea that there's a you see a circle and part of the eye, this image part on the fovea becomes circular. So we know now that it doesn't actually become red, but somehow it encodes redness. Whereas then the mind, we want to say it can become anything because you could just imagine anything. It takes in the input of all the senses and puts them together. So the mind is like a super sense organ that he used the
It
expression
takes in
before.
the forms of things.
Yeah. Yes.
Which are
It
not
is.
themselves visible per se. But yeah.
So it's like he had used the example that we gave in our Anima episode. A hand is like the ultimate tool because it can use any other tool. And so the mind, it's like an ultimate form. Because it can use any of the other forms to make sense of things.
Well, there is another, which is what it is by virtue of making things. So he's thinking there of an artistic implement.
So I think this was another issue.
Like an axe is what it is by virtue of cutting or something like that.
Well, I think so. There was a different section in Aquinas that we didn't read that addressed this, which is, I think that you skimmed over that. The question in part of our Aquinas episode was, is the mind active or passive? And so we have to somehow say that, well, it's both, right? That it has. So here saying there's a part that becomes all things. So it's passive. The senses are passive. The circle comes on and the eye passively reflects it, gets its own, turns red, gets circular, whatever.
Well,
Same thing with the mind.
I don't know. He's talking about the senses here, right? He's
Well, that's
talking about
right.
the noose. Yeah.
I'm saying by comparison, there is a part of the mind that has to be merely receptive, and
Right.
then this other part, which is the noose, that is what it is by virtue of making all things. So there has to be an active part of the mind and a passive part of the mind.
Yeah, it makes sense. So the thing that's actualizing the potentiality here.
Yep.
Light makes potential colors into actual colors. So the mind is actively making something potential into something actual. All right, mind is in this sense of it is separable, impassible, unmixed, since it is in its essential nature activity. For always the active is superior to the passive factor, the originating force to the matter which it forms.
Yes, the active part of the mind is nous, and that has to be. Why is it separable, impassible, unmixed? It seems like it should say inseparable.
Well, separable.
Oh, separable from the rest of it.
Independent from the body in some sense, but
or independent from the rest of the mind.
In this sense of it, so you're saying the active part of the mind is separable. Impassible. I don't know what that means. I don't really like this translation. Impassible, unmixed, because it is in essence activity. I don't know how we get those other things from its essence being activity. The active is superior to the passive. The originating. Okay, so
I think impassible just means like it's not passive, right? That something that is passive is passable, means it can be infected by other things and changed by other things. I mean, I agree. It's a terrible translation, but I see, because it looks like
So
the word passive.
that would be impassive. Should be
Yes.
the proper.
Impassive. As opposed to, is that even a word?
Yeah, impassive is a word
okay.
that means just what you said, but impassible, yeah. But so he's thinking because it's an active factor that's superior to the passive factor, it's like an originating force, which is activating of potentialities. This means that it's not okay. If impassible is impassive, then okay, we get that. It's not passive. But then we have to say it's not mixed in, but separable. And I don't know why it has to be separable here because of this.
Well, let's read the last
Because
paragraph.
this is going to be important to,
yeah.
I think, for Aquinas. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Actual knowledge is identical with its object. In the individual, potential knowledge is in time prior to actual knowledge, but in the universe as a whole, it is not prior even in time. Mind is not at one time knowing and at another not. When mind is set free from its present conditions, it appears as just what it is and nothing more. This alone is immortal and eternal. We do not, however, remember its former activity because, while mind in this sense is impassible, mind as passive is destructible. And without it, nothing thinks. So a lot that's the end of it, and there's a lot packed in there. So yeah.
Okay. So actual knowledge in the sense of its actuality, right? The actualization of our potential knowing. Once we've actualized knowing, the knowledge becomes identical with its object. I mean, I know in De Anima, right? Yeah, we thought of the mind or the senses as in some sense becoming identical, formally identical with the object in an act of knowledge.
And I think for abstract knowledge, it would be even more the case, because you could still say that my eye and hence my mind becoming red when I see a red thing. Well, my eye does not become the red thing. It might become red, but it doesn't become the red. It becomes a reflection of that red thing. But when it gets to the mind is interested in just redness itself. So if I actually have actual knowledge of redness, then, well, there's nothing. It's not like I have actual knowledge of an image that corresponds to the redness out in the world. I actually have knowledge of redness. And I'm not sure if that works for redness, but it certainly works for like mathematical truths. There's no, if I think 2 + 2 = 4, there, it is not like that is merely an image of actual objects in the world, two laying next to each other and another two, and that totaling 4. The mathematical fact is identical when I know it to the actuality.
Yeah, I think we could say the same thing of the form of rabbit, but this was a puzzle
Yeah.
for Plato, right? But yeah, maybe even mud. But yeah, for the form of an animal, we could say, yeah, it's not just another sensible thing. And as such, the stronger identity between mind and object seems to be applicable here. But in the universe as a whole, it is not prior even in time. So yeah, knowledge is not temporally prior. We start out not knowing and then go to knowing. But then he says, right, yeah, so mind is not at one time knowing and another not, which seems to be, another way of saying we go from not knowing to knowing, not the other way around. Although I suppose we could.
Well, but he says it seems a double negative. Mind is not at one time knowing and another not. Mind is actually always knowing. So insofar as it is nous, it is identical with the knowing, with the actuality of the things. In time, we are passive. So there's a part of the mind that's sort of like an empty goblet, and then the knowledge, the nous, pours into it And then we have the thing in itself, the mathematical property or the form of rabbit or whatever it is. We have it really there. So even though temporally I had this passive, empty thing, and then, well, in ontological priority, knowledge is always prior, right? Knowledge is the thing that is causing the filling, the potentiality to become actual. The knowledge was pre-existent of this individual instance of knowing it.
Yeah.
So
So let me just reread this
yeah,
sentence because I got this confused. So potential knowledge is in time prior to actual knowledge, but in the universe as a whole, it is not. So yeah, just what you were saying. The ordinary way we think of this is that we go from not knowing, from potential knowledge to knowing. But in the universe as a whole, knowing is prior in a sense. And it's almost like Platonic recollection, right?
yep.
So, um, although it's still a bit confusing, but so it
So
becomes what it is. That I think, and that part of the point is it's, well, he's saying it becomes what it is, as if it's being actualized in the state of knowledge. It's still a little bit confusing how he can make this claim.
yeah, it can't be the active part that becomes what it is, because that's the whole point of the difference between passive and active. Only a passive thing becomes what it is. Goes from potentiality to actuality. An active thing is by definition unchanging. I mean, again, this is mysterious. I'm not sure why this has to be the case, but this seems to be what we've read here.
Set free from its present conditions, which are what? Ignorance or
Be no
attachment to the
be
body or
Yes, exactly.
um
When nous is not attached to the passive part of mind, to the body, it appears just as what it is and nothing more. It's just nous. This alone is immortal and eternal. And we
yeah.
need that. Without it, nothing thinks.
Yeah. So this almost sounds like God. Okay. Um all right. So quite a weird and difficult to understand metaphysical position.
And that's
Aquinas
all he
going to
says
make it.
about it, I
Yeah.
believe. So that this is a loophole. Everything else in Aristotle makes you think that the mind certainly cannot exist beyond the body. But maybe this is sort of a leftover piece of Platonism, or maybe we'd have to, as you say, it does seem like it has something to do with God. So we'd have to kind of delve into the relation between this and the metaphysics to see why he wants to say, like, I mean, does anything, since we read about the unmoved mover not that long ago, does anything about our relation to God to you imply the sort of Plotinus point that there's a part of our mind, and this was in Spinoza too, there's a part of our mind insofar as we are reasoning or that is transpersonal, that is identical with God, or at least, a piece of God, a somehow related to the divine essence. And it is, and we can actually, well, Plotinus thought we could actually experience that. I think Spinoza said we are immortal insofar as we are reasoning, right? Insofar as I'm thinking 2 + 2 = 4. Well, that is a atemporal, immortal entity. And so, if I've been reasoning all my life, then I've been, as Plato says, practicing for death.
Hmm. So I'm just looking at up the ancient Greek here. I think he uses the phrase nous poietikos. That's the active intellect.
Hmm.
It's sometimes translated. And poetikos meaning making, like poet. We get the word from poetikos. Um, and this is the part that, so it's the active intellect in particular, which can survive the death of the body. Whereas in general, right, even in De Anima, he straight up says in a different part of the De Anima, the soul is inseparable from the body. The body dies, the soul dies.
All right, so back to Aquinas, just to repeat this in against that Since Aristotle says understanding needs no bodily organ, therefore the human soul can act in its own right, and so must be able to
Where are
subsist
you?
in its. This is page 186. But against that, we had read that earlier.
Right, but we need moreover to the human soul. We didn't read that part.
Right. No, I'm still in number one. But right, it's the second part of number one. As Aristotle says, understanding needs no bodily organ. Therefore, the human soul can act in its own right, and so must be able to subsist in its own right as itself a thing. So the human soul is itself both a thing and a form. So Aquinas is being much less evasive. He's just saying right up, okay, then go on with the moreover here.
Moreover, the human soul's ultimate perfection consists in knowing truth with the mind. But to achieve this perfection, the soul needs to be joined to a body because it understands by way of images, which only the body can provide. So even if the soul is itself a thing, it has to be united to a body as its form. Okay.
All right, so we wanted to read the in reply here, and hopefully this will make sense, even though we haven't read all the objections yet. 187. By itself a thing is properly meant an individual substance. For Aristotle says that without a doubt, substance primarily means what is itself a thing, though secondarily, even if it seems to mean what is itself a thing. It rather means the sort of thing that thing is.
All right. So let's stop there, right?
Yeah.
So substances are in Aristotle are preeminently like biological objects. But anything that can legitimately said to be mind independently a unity. So primarily means a thing, right? So without a doubt, substance primarily means what is itself a thing. Though secondarily, it rather means the sort of thing that it is, right? So for Aristotle, its oneness comes from it being a sort of thing, being a kind, being a natural kind, and then it can actually be a thing, right? So if you can't be said to be a thing if you're an individual rabbit unless you're a kind of thing. So having an essence or form is very intimately related to being a particular, one's ability to be a particular. All right.
Yes, and I feel like the phrasing of that sentence is ambiguous, that the way that I read it originally made it sound like being a thing and full stop was the secondary thing, but actually he's saying no, secondarily it means the sort of thing that it is. So primarily it just means being a thing. Secondarily it means being this kind of thing. I think you were making a point that I do remember from Aristotle, is that I thought that second thing was what determined that it's a thing at all, right? It has to be
Yeah, it is.
a pencil to be a thing. It has to be a rabbit to be a thing. It can't just be a thing first and only secondarily a kind of thing. Is that right? Or does
I
this
think
matter?
he means the secondarily. I think the secondarily. So substance primarily means what is
Yes.
itself a thing, though secondarily. I think that's secondarily applies to what is itself a thing.
Right. That's what
Secondarily
he's
applies to
saying.
its particularity, but more importantly, it's the form. Substance applies more importantly to the essence of the thing, the form that makes it a particular thing. Are we?
I'm thinking, I think you just said what I agree that Aristotle means. In other words, that the type is primary.
Yep.
But what he actually says here, substance primarily is just being a thing. So just having individuality is the primary, and secondarily is what type
No,
of thing
I
it
mean,
is.
I
Because
think that those secondarily modifies what comes before, but
that's what I had thought originally when I read it. But when you read it, I think it's the opposite. The reason this matters is, well, at least I'm making a connection here between that the claim and the argument for the existence of God, that in order to argue that a God exists, we have to know what type of thing he is. That's what he was Aquinas was objecting to, was this basically Aristotelian point that you can't do logic about something just based on its bare particularity. You have to know what it is that you're talking about. And Aquinas says, no, we can establish that God, whatever God is, exists just based on these causality arguments and change arguments and other stuff. Even though we can't know him in his essence because we're finite and he's infinite. So being an individual, in this case at least, is more primary epistemically at least than being that type of individual or being God. So maybe the same thing would go to being a rabbit, is I can know something dug that hole, but I don't have to know that it's a rabbit.
All right. I'm not sure, but let's
Yeah.
let's move on.
Yeah, keep going.
Now, an individual substance not only subsists, that is, exists in its own right, but does so as a whole instance of some species and genus of substance. Thus, Aristotle adds that hands, feet, and such like don't so much name substances, primary or secondary, as parts of substances. For though they don't need something else as a subject to exist in, thus possessing one characteristic of substances, they aren't complete instances of any specific nature of a thing, and so belong to a species and genus only indirectly. Hands and feet. So what do we do with body parts, and why is he worried about body parts here?
I mean, they don't have essences of their own. We know that much, that they are part of the essence of humanity or of whatever creature they're a part of.
They don't need something else as a subject to exist in.
I don't
I mean,
understand
they
that.
do need to be attached to a body. I mean, that's
Yeah.
famous.
So is that being
Aristotelian example?
is it just that you could chop off a hand and it's still a hand, but it is not a hand in the sense of, a part of the body?
Aristotle says it isn't.
Mm.
Once it's not functioning, it's not a hand. So
Yep.
I am not sure what he means here. It's not, so the needing of something else as a subject to exist in, that's the way we normally think of properties. So
Right.
it is true a hand is not just like a property of the body.
Sure.
There is a kind of independence to it. There's a kind of, it does have its own form and its own function. So maybe we could leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has its own form and function, and so it's a bit like a substance, but it's not a, we don't go to the zoo to see hands. Like, you can't just put them in the cage. They're not foraging, surviving independently as a species. But yeah.
I think Thing from the Addams Family objects to your characterization.
Yeah.
Now, certain people deny to the soul or life principle of human beings both these requisites for being itself a thing, saying the principle of life is equilibrium, that's Empedocles, or complexity, Galen, or something similar. In this case, the life principle could neither subsist on its own right, nor be a whole instance of some species or genus of substance, but would simply be a form of matter like all others. Yet this is already impossible for the life principles of plants, the activities of which, like digestion and growth, must spring from a source transcending the physical-chemical reactions those activities employ as tools, as Aristotle shows.
All right, so let's just, so he's, some people have a kind of naturalistic view of life and say, right, just like the form of anything else could arise, a form of a living thing could arise naturally. And he's saying here, it's impossible because digestion and growth can't just come from physiochemical reactions, which I think we would say we know not to be true today, but he thinks Aristotle says that or shows it.
Complexity and equilibrium don't transcend the physics and chemistry of the elements. It is equally impossible for the life principles of things living lives of sense awareness, the activities of which stretch to taking in the appearances of things without their matter, as Aristotle proves, physical-chemical behavior can't stretch beyond matter and arrangement of matter. And it is a fortiori impossible for the life principles of things which reason, the activities of which involve abstracting the species of a thing, not only from matter, but from every material condition of particularity, so as to know them in general. I mean, I think we're seeing a pattern here that he just thinks that we can't explain he feels like for forms to make sense, they have to have some characteristics of Platonic forms. They can't just be the arrangement, like I was saying, the arrangement of pencils that you've laid down in parallel lines. That's not what a form is. A form is a causal agent. And the fact that there are a number of different plants or animals that react in the same ways, that have the same telos, that have the same form, this means form has to be something, not just a token specific thing within individual plants or animals, but it has to be something that transcends any particular plant or animal and guides, injects, somehow makes all the hot things hot, makes all the rabbits rabbit-like, etc.
Yeah, I think another way of putting this is that if we take the rabbit and we give everything we know biologically about it, including at the cellular level, to say how all these things work. And so we can say, hey, a cell is a little kind of spherical thing, and it's got this porous membrane which opens and closes under certain conditions, and describe all the workings of cells, and then all the way up to the rest of the body. Just give all the, and so what you're doing there is you're describing these formal arrangements of matter that he's talking about, like the pencils you described, right? Being in a certain shape. But you're never going to get, he thinks, life out of that, or a certain species out of that. And and we do, I think philosophers would say something similar today, which is that there's not they would deny that one is reducible to the other, or they at least would certainly deny that macroscopic phenomena are simply reducible to, say, atoms and molecules. And that's a big complicated issue in philosophy. But we can't, we couldn't reduce all our biological language to stating the positions of atoms and molecules, for instance, without losing something. So it's a similar sort of idea here, that we're not going to be able to give a full, we might be able to do a lot causally, but we're not going to be able to give a full account of what's going on formally as we experience it by simply referring to the arrangements of matter.
Right. All right. So he's talked about animals. He's talked about reason. And there's something further still to consider, which is peculiar to all reasoning souls. Not only do they take in species that can be understood without their matter and material conditions, but as Aristotle proves, they cannot share that special activity of theirs with any bodily organ, in the sense of having a bodily organ for thinking, as an eye is the bodily organ for seeing. And so the life principle of a thing with understanding has to act on its own, with an activity peculiar to itself, not shared with the body. And because activity flows from actuality, well, maybe we should stop right there. So this is definitely not the Aristotelian position, I think, anymore, because I don't think he says that. Right. Well, he didn't, it's very vague what we read. Nous is required for thinking. Nous is somehow separable from the passive part of the mind. But still, I was saying that the passive part of the mind is what takes in the abstraction, and it takes in it in its actuality. So it's not merely a reflection of red like the eye. It takes in the actual concept form of red, and that's right there in the physical mush that it is our brain. But Aquinas, it seems, is saying for that to actually get to the abstractions can't be encoded in biological stuff, right? All you could do is have your eye turn red, your eye get a circular image on it, something like that. For us to actually think, he just doesn't understand how, like, he doesn't have this model of a computer that we had, how you can, store data in a physical system. So there has to be an immaterial thing to store data at all.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful analogy. Um, yeah, so he's already said, even just life itself is irreducible. But so a fortiori, what about reasoning souls? So yeah, they certainly are not going to simply be reducible to material conditions. And in particular, because they're not going to just be like an eye, like an organ of seeing, they are going to be, as in the part of Aristotle that we read, it's got to be something separable and immaterial, nous, the active part of the intellect. But he's okay. So, but the jump he's making here, and this I think may be a critical jump, because Aristotle just says the active intellect is separable, and we thought, well, maybe that's just something like God, or right, that our minds partake in, or whatever weird metaphysics you want to think of. Here he's saying if the active principle of a human soul, sorry, if the active intellect in a human soul is separable, then the human soul must be separable. I think that's the jump he's making here when he says, and so the life principle of the thing with understanding has to act on its own, with an activity peculiar to itself, not shared with the body. Do you see what I'm saying? He's going to jump from this particular thing Aristotle said about active intellect to the human soul in general.
Yes, I think
and
this
maybe
is
Aristotle would have agreed, but I don't know. But yeah, I don't think
right. I'm just trying to think about, because ultimately this is going to get to Descartes, and we read his was it on the Passions? What was the name of the late reading that we read on Close Reads?
I think it was on the Passions. Yeah.
Yes, so it was a lot getting into the mechanics of how mind and body relate, and it turned out that there was a lot of sort of symbolic activity that was just taking place in the body. So I think he wants to say that Aristotle wanted to say that the mind is partially bodily, right? The passive part, or at least not self-subsistent, inextricably bound to the body. But then there was the active part that is, as you say, separable. So is that what we're saying here? Or is it seems like Aquinas might be cutting it in a different spot, because if you want to say mind and soul, right, they're literally the same, right, for Aristotle. So both, if you want to say which one is the soul, it's not just the nous, it's also the passive part of the mind. Do we have a name for that, with the suke or something like that? I don't know.
No, I think nous might be the same. I think he's just qualifying it with adjectives like poeticos. But
But you're
right, so
saying
the soul is not just the understanding of the intellect, but it's also the nutritive part,
yes,
all
yes.
that other stuff that we share with plants, right? Yeah.
And
So
is Aquinas, it seems
yeah.
like Aquinas is not agreeing with that, because he wants to say that the soul is the immortal part. So, well, then do plants have souls? Because he's saying that
Yeah.
he's
Well, I don't know for Aquinas, but no, yeah, in the Aristotelian sense, plants have souls for Aquinas, but I think what he's saying that when a soul has a nous, when it has an understanding or an
Mhm.
intellect, and I think he should say, to be perfectly clear, this active part of the intellect, then I think he's trying to draw the conclusion that the human soul in particular, because it has an active intellect, must be separable, since the active intellect, according to Aristotle, is separable.
Yep.
So this is the trick, I think, that he's pulling off. Yeah.
I just wonder though, because he's already proven that you can't explain merely through the biology why plants have a telos, for instance, why this fern looks like that fern. He doesn't have the idea that there's DNA that can be encoded in a material substrate that then can be active, because material is not active. It has to be something passive. So there right. Uh, so the form itself of even a plant must be external. Is it a soul then? It's still my question. It definitely exists, just like mathematical truth, outside of space and time and outside of any particular instance of a plant. Even if all the ferns died in the world, then presumably that universal mechanism that was able to cause the activity in those ferns would still exist.
Well, you're
So
bringing up this very controversial subject in Aristotle scholarship, right? The whether when you say the form of rabbit, so it's supposed to be immanent, right? And which implies
mhm.
there's a bunch of different rabbit forms for each individual rabbit. But there are other parts of Aristotle where he seems to be saying that there's one big form, like a Platonic form, that somehow applies to each individual rabbit. So that's been I think, a source of controversy for centuries. How to interpret that? Is it each one or the other or both somehow? Or so? So I think, yeah, I think the most plausible thing to me to say is that immanent forms must be individual, and they are the souls of those particular animals.
Right. And for Aristotle, like even if he did let some Platonism leak into his theory, I don't know that it causes him a terrible problem, but I agree that I would try to avoid the Platonism and say, well, just, the fact that there's this individual rabbit soul has things in common with another individual rabbit soul doesn't mean that there is a master rabbit soul outside of both rabbits that is causing both. That's just Platonic nonsense for Aristotle. I think we can get around that, but I think Aquinas has to agree with that. He's specifically told us that we cannot explain how forms could be purely immanent. If they're purely immanent, they would be material, they would be passive. They have to be something active, which means they have to be separable. So Aquinas, with his Christian metaphysics, I feel like there's a problem for him if he lets in too much Platonism, that he can't have individual human souls, but then also the form of a fern, that's somehow a soul that's floating around. I mean, is it a type of angel? Like, I just don't.
Well, I'm a little confused by your point.
He
Because
has said that all
the
forms are
form,
transcendent, right?
sorry.
He said Aquinas here has said that forms are transcendent of individuals, right? They're not immanent.
Where is he saying that?
On the whole previous page. So, uh, impossible for the life principles of plants. The activities must spring from a source transcending those physical-chemical reactions of those activities employs as
Right.
tools.
I didn't see that as meaning that they had to be Platonic forms, though.
Well, I guess
Uh,
I don't know what transcending the physical chemical. Can you
well,
still
an
say it's
Aristotelian immanent
imminent?
form
So it's
transcends in
imminent.
a way, but
Is it though? Because if an Aristotelian form was basically DNA, then it doesn't transcend the physical chemical. It just acknowledges that the physical chemical itself has activity within it. It has not just the blueprints, but the actualization function.
yeah, I don't
eh,
think DNA is the correct
okay.
analogy. Just because, yeah, we have to.
DN,
DNA does play a role in the act of. So I mean, it's not just in reproduction, but DNA. Genes get switched on and off. They do have an active role in the way the body functions. We should point that out. But that's not all of it, right? So what's going on in a cell when it does all the celly things it does, doesn't entirely, right? It relied on DNA to become what it is, but it's not relying on DNA entirely to do what it does. It just does what it does. And that's the same thing to be explained by a form. Now we would say, well, it's all bottom up. It's all just one atom knocking against another and producing this emergent effect somehow, or what looks to us like an emergent effect. But I think for Aristotle and Aquinas, that would have to be, if you want to say, how do I explain that? Just even the cell, if they had known about that, how do I explain all that behavior? And it does look very much like intelligent design. I mean, some of the shit that goes on inside cells is crazy. You know, it just looks like little homunculi, intelligent homunculi running around doing business. But yeah. So we would have to say, I mean, they would want to say, I think, that's explained by some imminent form. Or maybe, we would want to say, whether, yeah, they'd say it explains it, it makes it what it is. Do you agree with that?
I think we should just keep going because I'm trying to pull apart Aquinas and Aristotle a little bit, and I think you're resisting that, and I'm not sure that I actually have textual warrant to do that. So I feel like I'm just speculating, but I think what you said was valuable. Let's just to finish
Yeah, I
that
mean, I think
paragraph.
the main point is just this. It does seem to me he's trying to. You may be right that there's some kind of problem that's cropping up here from what he's doing, but I think the fundamental thing is that he is trying to use this Aristotelian idea of the separability of the active intellect to get to the separability of the whole
Yes.
human soul. Right? You agree with that? Okay.
Yep. Uh, you already looked at this sentence, and because activity flows from actuality, the understanding soul must possess an existence in and of itself, not dependent on the body. Continuing, for forms that depend for existence on the material or subject that they form don't have activities of their own. It is not heat that heats, but hot things. For this reason, then, later philosophers has judged that the understanding part of the soul is something that subsists of itself. Thus, Aristotle says that the mind is a sort of undecomposable substance. And Plato saying that the soul is immortal and subsists of itself because it moves itself amounts to the same. For he is using movement broadly to mean any activity, and the mind moving itself must be interpreted to mean that it is active of itself.
Okay. Forms that depend on for their existence on the material or subject don't have activities of their own. Okay. So mind has an activity of its own, but it couldn't have that if it were simply dependent on matter. Um, I
Is
think
this
this seems to be
something?
more of the same, but yeah.
Is this something that Descartes abandons? Does Descartes? I know Berkeley and Malebranche don't think that a material thing can be active toward another material thing, that there has to be God coming in and doing the moving, or it is just a pattern. Even Hume is denying that there's some sort of power within material things, but just doesn't think that we have resources to say, oh well, there must be God moving it, like Malebranche says. They're all going on the same. Uh, Basically, it sounds like Aquinas, the schoolman's opinion from Aquinas here, that matter is basically passive. Does Descartes also think that matter is completely passive and mind must be the thing that moves matter, or do we even know that for Descartes?
Well, for Descartes, matter is just extension, right? It's just spatiotemporality. He doesn't even include, I don't even
I thought it's
think he
motion too.
includes density, right? So Locke will include density in the definition of matter, but Descartes doesn't even include that. So for instance, to explain why certain objects don't, explain why I can't simply put my fist through the table without any effort. Ultimately, I'm talking about little geometrical shapes, atomic shapes that are, like if they were squares, that one square doesn't get pushed into the other square. It's probably not very clear. But anyway, everything is explained through extension. And then he doesn't want to say there's any force at a distance. So there's all these vortices. The
Yeah.
world is entirely packed with matter in the sense of extension, like one big puzzle, but it gets pushed around. All these extended things push each other around, and then there's these vortices. So I don't know the details of it, but
Well,
it's a weird picture that tries to get rid of action at a distance.
Yeah,
make
I think
everything
so.
like a machine. Yeah.
Yeah, so matter can exert force on other matter. It just can't originate that force. It can't. So you need God to be the first mover, but it's not like Malebranche where, matter can't even. So I don't know that certainly Descartes does not say, well, we know that matter is merely passive. And so every single instance of what we think is causality, there has to be activity that immediately comes from some other way. It ultimately comes from some other place. It comes from God, but it doesn't immediately come from God. He's not an occasionalist, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think this
Unless we
gets us right. The essentialists would want to say the power is there in the, people can go listen to our Ellis episode on PEL, but that that there are natural kinds within nature that have their own powers, right? So like what's a good example? An electron or something. And it's not
Mhm.
just that there's this little thing and then there are these big laws of nature sitting over them and making them do what they do, and we could change the laws of nature, like changing a program or something. But the what makes the electron what it is its activity and its powers, its dispositions to do this and that in this or that circumstance. And that, I think, is more of an Aquinas type view, an Aristotelian type view, and it is the thing that Descartes and others kind of rebelled against
Yep.
because they thought of these things as like occult properties, like, oh, how do you explain why you're sleepy? You have the dormitive property or something like that. They saw that as just spooky and fishy and too Aristotelian. But yeah, I think they're wrong about that. But
You want to continue on that second
yeah.
big paragraph?
Yeah, Plato, however, went further, saying not only that the soul subsisted on its own, but that it possessed a complete specific nature of its own. For he thought the whole nature of human beings resided in their souls, defining them not as a body, souls composite, but as souls using bodies, as though souls inhabited bodies like sailors do ships or people their clothes. But this is impossible, for clearly the life principle is what gives life to the body. But being alive is existing as a living thing. So the soul is that by which the human body actually exists. In other words, it is the sort of thing a form is. So the human soul is the form of the human body. Further, if soul inhabited body like a sailor his ship, it wouldn't give body or its parts their specific nature. Yet clearly it does, since when it leaves the body, the various parts lose the names they first had, or keep them in a different sense. For a dead man's eyes are eyes only in the sense that eyes in a picture or a statue are. And the same goes for other parts of the body. This is straight out of Aristotle. Moreover, if soul inhabited body like a sailor his ship, the union of body and soul would be accidental. And when death separated them, it wouldn't be decomposition of a substance, which it clearly is. All right. So he's defending the Aristotelian view of soul
Mm-hmm.
against Plato here to say the soul is of a body and it's it's what makes it alive, and having a soul is not just like having a sailor in a ship. So this is an interesting wrinkle because it Plato would have been a much easier way for him to go, right?
Yep.
But he's going to defend the Aristotelian view and then still say that human souls are somehow separable.
So our conclusion is that soul is itself a thing in the sense of being able to subsist by itself. One which does not possess a complete specific nature of its own. Rather, it is something which completes a human being's specific nature by being the form of a human body. So that the soul is at one and the same time a form and itself a thing.
All right. So this is a bit weird. Does not possess a complete specific nature on its of its own. That sounds like there are no personal souls, which would kind of line up with what we read in Aristotle, where it sounded like it was just a great big world intellect, right? The intellect, nous, the active intellect is separable in the sense of being a, almost like a German idealist super intellect of which we partake. Um, and that seems to be right in line, does not possess a complete specific nature of its own. It's like we have Does that make sense to you?
I guess I don't know what for Aquinas a complete specific nature really amounts to. Um, yeah, can he admit, he could put forth a biblical passage here, whatever, that says, in the afterlife we are fully ourselves. We have our personal identity that is corresponds to what we had on earth, and how could we do that unless the soul had its own complete specific nature?
I mean, the material body is the individuating thing. So,
So it sounds like we become
so
one with
just
God. We
to say
become,
that intellect, active intellect, is separable for some reason does nothing to say that it carries personal identity. That's my point.
yeah.
It's
Well,
completely generic. Yeah.
Nous was a cosmological principle, right? I mean, it is basically that for Spinoza, immortality, insofar as I'm thinking of the mathematical facts, does not give me individual immortality. It's because I become one with the transcendent mind, the nous, that I am immortal. I mean, is that what
He
Aquinas
seems
is
to be
going to
on
have
that
to
track,
say
but
immortality is? That's really
he's
interesting because that's very heterodox for Christianity,
that's
as I
not what I
understand it.
understood Aquinas to say, but yeah, he seems to be on that track here, which is very surprising. So shall I just read this last paragraph?
Sure.
And this fits with the hierarchy of forms in nature, for forms of lower order bodies are higher the closer they approximate and resemble higher causes. For consider the activities peculiar to forms, the activities of elemental forms, the lowest and closest to matter of all, don't transcend the physiochemical level of expanding and contracting in what seem other ways of arranging matter. But above these come forms of compounds, which, over and above such elemental activities, display behavior specific to their own natures derived from heavenly bodies. As, for example, the magnetic properties of iron, which derive not from heat and cold and properties like that, but from sharing the power of the heavens.
Okay.
Above these, again, some plant forms or plant souls, which
Come
resemble,
plant forms. Yep.
sorry, come plant forms or plant souls, which resemble not simply the heavenly bodies, but the spirit movers of those heavenly bodies, inasmuch as they too cause movement, moving themselves in certain ways. This is why I associate when he talks about heavenly bodies, I'm just think of laws of nature like gravitation and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Above these, again, come the souls of lower animals, which resemble the substances that move the heavens, not only in moving themselves around, but in having knowledge of their own. Though such animals know only material things in a material way, and so require bodily organs. Above these, further still, are the life principles of human beings, which resemble the higher substances even in their kind of knowledge, since they can know and understand immaterial substances. But they differ from them still in that human souls by nature acquire immaterial intellectual knowledge from knowledge of material things through the senses. And in this way, then, we can know the mode of existence of the human soul from examining its activity. Inasmuch as it has an activity transcending that of material things, it has a higher existence than the body and doesn't depend on it. But inasmuch as by nature it acquires immaterial knowledge from material, it clearly needs to be united to a body in order to have a complete specific nature. Ooh, wow. For
Okay.
nothing has a complete specific nature unless it possesses everything required for the activity that characterizes that species. In this way, then, inasmuch as the human soul is united to a body as its form, and yet also has an existence transcending that of the body and not dependent on it, clearly it exists on the boundary between bodily and separate substances. Wow. What an interesting view. So, yeah, not the complete specific nature. I mean, the specific as in the species.
Yes. So we can dispose of most of that just in that, yeah, okay, he is confirmed. Like I said, plants have souls, just like for Aristotle. Plants have souls, animals have souls. What he's adding is that it's the way that they are transcendent is they resemble heavenly bodies and the spirit movers of these heavenly bodies. So that's a new element here. And so he can ultimately say that he does talk about angels in some of these things, that he can talk about angels, say, pushing things around. He can incorporate them into his physics if necessary. You know, whether you want to call them angels or just say, but you don't have to just say they're platonic forms. And it's no problem for his Christian, maybe the angel idea means that you're not introducing a horrible heresy to Christianity when you say there is more than just God and then human souls. There could be other kinds of souls that, you know, the demiurge or whatever, that move things around and play various roles in physics.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out what he means by saying now, you know, just going back to this question of the complete specific nature.
Yes, that's the important thing.
One which the soul is itself a thing, being able to subsist by itself, but does not have a complete specific nature of its own.
There's no species soul that
Right.
differentiates human souls from other kinds of souls. There's just spiritual stuff or something. It sounds like. And maybe it could just be individuated. Maybe you could still be Wes after death, and we don't have to merge into a great oneness, but we are not a species. We don't have a DNA. We don't have a form. We're just because to have a form, you have to have parts, right? But human
Yeah,
beings,
I think that's yeah. I think my interpretation. I'm just trying to say I think I have to retract that interpretation about it not being individuated, like not being a personal individual. Because I think what he does seem to be saying is that it must be to perform a species function, right? It must be attached to a body to make me a human. I don't know, right? To be a human form, it must be attached to a body. So once we die, it no longer performs the speciating function since it's not attached to a body. So it's not just. So it could be Wes-ness, but not humanness. That doesn't make sense. I'm a little unclear. A lot unclear. I don't know. Do you have a clear?
I mean, I don't think that he's telling us very specifically. We're now at the point where we're out of time, and I'm wondering if we should spend a second session on this or not. Probably not. If we did want to know, you know, we do have a good couple pages here after this part as the hence, and then a couple pages before. So he does say stuff like, although a human soul can subsist by itself, it hasn't a complete specific nature of its own. So separate souls don't constitute one of the levels of being.
I think we're just
what
doing
is
a little research here online. I think we're on the right track.
Yes.
Because I think he's going to say the soul in the separable sense is not a full human being and that it doesn't become one again until the resurrection, whether it's reunited with the body.
Yep.
So I think we are, I think we're at least.
So actually the heresy is that you can hang out in heaven as your personal self and play board games with Jesus or whatnot, when actually the original Christian doctrine is that there's going to be the resurrection. Our physical bodies are going to come back and be reunited. Like, and that is the kingdom.
Yeah. So what are these separable souls doing while they're not human and not attached to bodies? Are they?
I mean, are they existing outside space and time?
And are they still personal?
Are there ghosts in the Bible? I don't know whether there's any. I can't think of any stories where like Jesus sees his Mary's father, his dead grandpa, comes and talks to him. Like, is there that kind of ghost, personal ghosts in the Bible? I don't think so, but maybe somebody can correct me. So you could just be you could be hanging out in the heavenly hosts, but you're not going to be active as an individual until you get back in your body. Is my suspicion. Even soul depends somewhat on body, since it can't achieve its complete specific nature without body, but it doesn't so depend on body that it can't exist without it. I'm just looking through these different hence things. Number 7, the soul is joined to a body for its own perfection, both its essential perfection, the completion of its species, and a supervening perfection, the knowledge it draws from the senses, for this is the human's being natural mode of understanding. If separated souls of children and other human beings used another method of understanding, that's no objection, for this belonged to them as separate, not as having a human nature. Okay. I don't know that these are just introducing more questions for me. Uh, and I don't feel, even if we read every paragraph in
Yeah.
here, that these would be answered.
Yeah, just poking around online, I think he may be saying that there is personal identity, but without being fully human, which is a weird. Right. So after death, there is personal identity survives, as we would take the typical Christian view to say, but then but we don't become fully human again until we become reunited with our bodies. So he's doing a lot of work to keep this Aristotelian.
So the next passage in this book, which is from a completely different source, Thomas's commentary on St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, is just a one-page thing, and I think it addresses exactly what we've been talking about, which is and it doesn't have this whole structure of here objections. He says, if we deny the resurrection of the body, it isn't easy. Indeed, it becomes very difficult to defend the immortality of the soul. The union of body and soul is certainly a natural one, and any separation of soul from body goes against its nature as an imposed and is imposed on it. So if soul is deprived of body, it will exist imperfectly so long as that situation lasts.
Yeah, so this is a section called "My Soul Is Not Me." But,
yes.
But yeah, we're over time here.
Yep. And this is why Paul says, if the dead don't rise, we have only this life to hope for. So yeah, there is no eternal life just as a soul. Your soul by itself is not you. It exists only imperfectly. To be fully actualized, we need the resurrection. So Aquinas has a much weirder, less modern Christian view than one might think. And I think
like
I'm satisfied moving on then. Let's if you are. Thanks for listening. We would love if you would give us a nice rating review on Apple Podcasts, even if you're listening through this, as I hope you are, through our ad-free Patreon feed, right? Even if you don't want to give us money, go there. You would have gotten this episode fully ad-free. And if you give us money, then you get all the video versions of these ad-free, and you get the when we do have parts 2, parts 3, which we will get back to doing pretty soon, you'll get all those. Thanks. Later.
Thanks.